I always thought the walls of my home held no secrets. How could they? Northwood Heights had been our family's stronghold for decades, a place of both history and luxury, where each room echoed with the stories of those who had come before us. From the marble floors that gleamed in the soft light of the chandeliers to the richly adorned walls that told of the Vanderwal's old money and standing, our home was an embodiment of power. It was where I had married Charles, raised Clara and Nathan, and painted my dreams into existence. We were untouchable, or so I believed. My name is Miranda Vanderwal, and this is the story of how the poison of betrayal crept into our lives like a shadow that never left. Charles and I, both dedicated to our work, had built a life that many would envy. Clara, our eldest daughter, had recently moved out, eager to embrace her independence. Nathan, our youngest, was finishing up his studies and dreaming of a future that stretched far beyond the walls of Northwood Heights. They were both intelligent, driven, and full of potential. We had raised them to understand the value of their name and the responsibility that came with it. But beneath the polished surface of our perfect lives, there was something wrong, something I couldn't yet see. Felicia had been with us for 5 years. She was our maid, a quiet, efficient woman who was always there when needed, but never imposing. She kept to herself mostly, her dark hair always neatly pulled back into a bun, her clothes pressed and impeccable. She was punctual, respectful, and never seemed to ask for much. She had been an invisible part of our routine, like the furniture or the curtains. I never thought to question it. She was just part of the machine that kept our house running smoothly. And yet, despite her apparent professionalism, there were moments when something didn't sit right with me. It started with little things, almost imperceptible at first. A vase that had been in our family for generations shattered without explanation. Charles was furious, but he dismissed it as a mere accident. Then came a silk scarf, one I had inherited from my mother, ruined by a strange stain. No matter how much I tried to wash it, the stain remained, a dark blotch that seemed to mock me. I told myself it was nothing, that perhaps I was being overly sensitive. But then the illnesses started. At first, it was a vague sense of fatigue, a lingering tiredness that couldn't be explained. Charles complained of stomach pains, Nathan developed headaches, and Clara seemed perpetually exhausted. Soon the entire household was afflicted with a malaise that no doctor could diagnose. We went to specialist after specialist, each one baffled by the symptoms. The doctors couldn't pinpoint a cause, but they all agreed that it was something insidious, something that affected our livers. The word disease hung in the air like a spectre. Liver disease, they said. Early signs, they claimed. But the blood tests didn't lie. Something was poisoning us, and we had no idea what it was. One afternoon, as I was passing the kitchen on my way to the garden, something made me pause. I glanced through the doorway and saw Felicia standing at the counter, a plastic bag in her hands. She appeared completely focused on what she was doing, her movements fluid but cautious. I should have kept walking. I should have trusted that she was just preparing dinner like any other day, but something about her made me stop, made me watch. She opened the bag and poured the contents into the stew simmering on the stove. It was so subtle, so quick that I almost doubted my own eyes. But I had seen it. I had seen her, with no apparent hesitation, take something out of the bag and add it to the pot. My heart stopped. What was she doing? What had she just put in our food? I stepped forward, my mind reeling, but I couldn't seem to make sense of what I had witnessed. My feet felt heavy as I entered the kitchen. "Felicia," I called out, and she turned with a start, the bag still hanging from her hand. Her face went pale, as if she had been caught in something she wasn't supposed to be doing. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice strangely calm despite the panic rising inside me. She looked at me, her eyes wide and innocent, but there was something off about her expression, something unreadable. "Yes, Mom, everything is fine," she said, but her voice lacked the usual steadiness. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, but I didn't trust it. I approached the stove slowly, my eyes never leaving her face, my gaze flicking to the stew. It looked the same as always. There was nothing unusual about it, but something about the way she had acted. It unsettled me. "What was in the bag, Felicia?" I asked, my voice sharp now. She hesitated, then lowered her eyes, avoiding my gaze. "It... I... I don't know what you mean, ma'am." The words didn't add up. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and palpable. "I saw you," I said. "You put something in the stew. What was it?" Her lips trembled, and for a moment she didn't speak. She just stood there, her back stiff. I could see her hands shaking slightly, as if she was fighting the urge to flee. My heart pounded in my chest and I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. Something wasn't right. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I waited, my patience thinning, but still, I couldn't bring myself to fully comprehend what was going on. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Felicia looked at me then, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Guilt? Fear? I couldn't tell. It's not what you think, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to hurt anyone, I just wanted to make it stop." "Make what stop?" I asked, the unease in my stomach growing. Her shoulders slumped and she seemed to deflate, as if the weight of the words she was about to speak had crushed her. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was trying to make it stop, make everything stop." The words were disjointed, filled with an emotion I couldn't decipher. She stepped back as if afraid I might lash out. "I was just trying to fix it," she whispered. I didn't understand. What could she possibly have been trying to fix? What was she talking about? Everything in my body screamed that something was terribly wrong, but I didn't know how to connect the dots. Felicia, the woman who had been in our home for years, the one I had trusted with everything, what was she hiding? "I think you'd better leave," I said, the command coming out of my mouth before I could stop it. The quiet tremor in her hands made me uneasy, but my heart was too full of questions to be anything but cold. She nodded silently, taking one last glance at me before she turned and left the kitchen. I stood there for a long moment, the stew simmering softly on the stove, but my mind was no longer focused on the meal. A vague unease settled deep within me, gnawing at my thoughts. What had she meant? What was she trying to remedy? Days slipped by in a haze. Charles grew increasingly frail, Nathan developed a persistent cough that seemed to linger like a shadow, and Clara began to lose her appetite, her once vibrant spirit dimming. It wasn't until much later, when the truth finally crashed down upon me like a relentless storm, that I understood. Felicia had been subtly undermining our well-being, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but with a hidden agenda. The very meals we savoured, lovingly prepared by her hands, had been tainted with something far more sinister than we could have ever fathomed. Felicia was taken away one afternoon, her tear-streaked face barely registering in my mind as she left. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of it all. In the weeks that followed, doctors confirmed our worst fears. The liver ailments we had all suffered from were no mere coincidence. They were intentional, and we would never know how long this had been unfolding right under our noses. The house felt desolate without Felicia, but that emptiness was an ominous chasm. The damage had been done, and it was irreversible. We attempted to piece our lives back together, but the loss of Nathan, the weight of his absence, was a wound that would never fully heal. In the months that followed, I immersed myself in my art, trying to paint over the tragedy that had forever altered our lives. Each brushstroke felt inadequate, yet it was the only way I could channel my sorrow. Gradually, life began to resemble something normal again, but the shadow of what had transpired lingered in every corner of our home. I couldn't shake the nagging question. How had I overlooked it? How had I failed to see the truth before it was too late? In the end, I learned a valuable lesson. Never trust anyone blindly. The world can be filled with hidden motives, and sometimes the ones we hold closest can harbour secrets that shatter our very foundations.